Super God Jean. Chapter 46. Even if I am sleeping with chins on, I wouldn't bother her with this. Moreover, there is really nothing going on, explained Han Sen. In our gang, Manly would only listen to chins on. So, unless she helps us, we won't be able to go tomorrow. Su Xiaoqiao held Han Sen's hand. Brother, dignity is worthless, but the sacred blood creature is priceless. If you really have something going on with chins on, you need to beg her and let her do whatever she wants with you. You need to focus on the big picture. Han Sen sighed. Unfortunately, there is really nothing. Then we are doomed. We will practice while others go hunting, Su Xiaoqiao said dejectedly. You don't have to be so frustrated. Even though I am not sleeping with chins on, we can still go hunting tomorrow, Han Sen laughed. What do you have in mind? Su Xiaoqiao watched Han Sen helplessly. Just finish shooting these arrows today. Hansen pointed to the bundles of arrows. Su Xiaoqiao said weakly, Brother, we each have 1,000 arrows to shoot while standing 450 feet away from the target, and those that miss the target will not be counted. We need at least 3 days to do that. Not necessarily. Han Sen tried the practice bow, which was much lighter than Doomsday. A 7.0 practice bow means that you use the bow to practice rapid shooting with a strength rating at 7.0. For Doomsday, you only draw the string with a strength rating at 7.0. He picked up an arrow and shot it toward the target. Instantly, it ended up on the bullseye. Han Sen didn't pause but kept shooting. While he didn't hit the bullseye each time, all his arrows were on the target. Su Xiaoqiao had thought it was impossible to finish practicing today. Yet Han Sen had shot 36 arrows in a short while and didn't seem to need a break. Brother, great job. 10 arrows in a row with a 7.0 bow, praised Su Xiaoqiao. Any archer knows that rapid shooting consumes a lot of energy and a normal archer can only shoot a dozen arrows in a row while those who shoot 24 arrows in a row must be a lot stronger than what the bow requires. Han Sen just smiled and said to Su Xiaoqiao, Don't just stand there. Let's finish the 2,000 arrows and go hunt the sacred blood creature. Ignorant, Lu Hongtao who was supervising them said with contempt. Being able to shoot 36 arrows was impressive, but 1,000 arrows was not so easy. Even if Han Sen had a strength rating over 8.0 or 9.0, he couldn't keep shooting at this pace. His arms and fingers would be wasted, so there was no way he could join the hunting tomorrow anyway. Han Sen also knew that shooting for a long time required more than just strength. However, he discovered that his muscles were incredibly tough and resilient. After shooting 24 arrows, his muscles got slightly sore. But as he shook out his arms, he felt fine again. Even if he used his muscles for a long time, his body would stay cool and strong. Han Sen knew it wasn't because of his Geno points, but his practice of Jideskin. 1,000 arrows with the 7.0 practice bow was not hard for him. He had enough strength and endurance to do the task. Han Sen kept shooting, while the man counting arrows was thunderstruck at the sight of 40 arrows thickly dotting the target. This guy is out of this world, he whispered. Who are you talking about? Someone heard his whisper and asked. Ass freak. He shot 40 arrows and didn't even pause, the man counting the arrows said. Ass freak. For real, come and see if you don't believe me. Soon a few bullseye members came to watch Han Sen shooting. After watching for a while, everyone was stunned. Wow, all 3 targets we are full. That was all him. Yeah, Xiaoqiao only shot a dozen arrows and hasn't even filled 1 target. No way. That must be a 4.0 practice bow. You can't even tell the difference between a 4.0 bow and a 7.0 practice bow. They look nothing alike. The man counting rolled his eyes. More and more bullseye members came around. Lu Hongtao could not help but stand up, staring at Han Sen who was still shooting. More arrows. Han Sen hadn't had such fun with archery in a long time. When he was practicing alone, he could only shoot the few arrows he owned and then stop to collect the arrows from the target himself. Now he could shoot as many as he wanted and as long as he wanted. Buddy, great job. This is the second bundle. Su Xiaoqiao untied another bundle of practice arrows, grabbed a bunch of arrows and stuck them in Han Sen's quiver. Just started warming up. Han Sen smiled and shot another arrow. Brother, if you shoot all the arrows and we can go hunting tomorrow, I will do anything for you. I'll even do your laundry, cried out Su Xiaoqiao. Forget about laundry. How about cash? Laughed Han Sen. Talking about money would hurt our friendship, replied Su Xiaoqiao. Han Sen paused every 50 arrows and used only his right hand to draw the string, instead of using both hands in turn. Super God Jean. Chapter 47. What is the noise outside? Young Manly heard it getting more and more noisy outside her office as she was reviewing the data of the sacred blood creature sent from Son of Heaven. Young Manly asked twice, but no one answered. She frowned and went to find out. Almost the entire Bullseye team was at the shooting range, cheering from time to time. Young Manly took out a telescope. Most of high-tech products lost their function in God's sanctuary, but primary instruments like the telescope still worked. Young Manly, starting to feel skeptical, put down the telescope and went to the shooting range. Ass freak, a real man, he's been going at this pace for so long. His endurance is invincible. I think 1,000 arrows was too light a punishment for him. He can probably finish before dinner. The Bullseye team saw Young Manly coming over, and quickly ran back to training. They were not afraid of Lu Hongtao, but terrified by Young Manly. Those arrows were all shot by him. Young Manly asked Lu Hongtao. Except for Target 9 and Target 10. Lu Hongtao felt somewhat reluctant to answer her. I see. Young Manly did not say anything and turned back to the office. Lu Hongtao did not know what Young Manly was thinking and quickly asked, Manly, the punishment is too mild and it would set a bad example. Should we add another 1,000 to their punishment? No. Young Manly left. Back in the office, Young Manly took out Han Sen's profile and reviewed it. Great endurance, good geno point counts, strength rating is probably at 9.0. Integrated compulsory education graduate with excellent scores. Young Manly carefully read the profile, pondered for a moment and muttered, I'll give him a chance, even just for the station master. Han Sen stopped after 500 arrows and rested for 2 hours before he resumed shooting. Although he could continue, he was afraid to scare everyone, so he took a break. By midnight, Han Sen and Su Xiaoqiao had shot 2,000 arrows. Han Sen had become famous in Bullseye and all members had changed their view of him. Anyone who could shoot 1,000 arrows in a day deserved respect. Sen, I'm not easily impressed, but you are amazing. Although most of the arrows were shot by Han Sen, Su Xiaoqiao was also sore and tired. He put his arm around Han Sen's neck and gave Han Sen a thumbs up. Don't mention it. Do you know what kind of sacred blood creature we are going to kill tomorrow? Asked Hansen. I'm so handsome that Manly's assistant couldn't resist my charm and told me everything, Su Xiaoqiao said triumphantly. So what is it? Han Sen didn't care for his bragging. It seems to be a flying creature. There aren't many archers in Son of Heaven's gang, so they want our help, replied Su Xiaoqiao. Hansen frowned, a sacred blood creature that can fly. That's tough. Sacred blood creatures were strong enough. If they had the ability to fly, it would be even harder to hunt them. After all, the range of the best alloy bows was only about half a mile and only a few people in First God's Sanctuary could even draw the string of those bows. If the sacred blood creature flew too high, arrows wouldn't do it much harm. Also, the skin of sacred blood creature was so stiff that even the tip of saber arrows couldn't cut through. Han Sen knew that Bullseye must have beast soul bows and arrows. And there must be alloy arrows better than saber arrows as well. But he didn't think that Young Manly would give him access to those. If he couldn't even pierce the skin of the sacred blood creature, even if this opportunity was heaven sent, he had no means to grasp it. Seems that I should buy a Z-steel arrow, Han Sen pondered. Z-steel was not steel, but a kind of metal humans discovered 50 years ago. Its characteristics were similar to steel, but its toughness were far beyond steel. The toughness of an alloy arrow could be greatly improved by adding just a little Z-steel. And all alpha alloy had Z-steel added. Doomsday and the broadsword Han Sen seized from Lu Feng had Z-steel in them, but the content was quite low. The broadsword contained 0.3% Z-steel, while Doomsday contained 0.4% Z-steel in its body and 0.5% Z-steel in its string. If a weapon contained more than 10% Z-steel, it could cut through the bones of mutant creatures. And if a weapon contained more than 60% Z-steel, it would be as strong as the bones of sacred blood creatures. However, Z-steel was extremely rare and therefore, its price was quite high. The Alliance also had strict control over its production, so any alloy with more than 1% Z-steel would be hard to find. Although the tip of saber arrows contained a little Z-steel, it would not exceed 0.1%. Hence to hunt a sacred blood creature with saber arrows was next to impossible, even if he could shoot the arrows directly into a wound. Han Sen's ideal arrow was the Z-steel arrow, which was 1% Z-steel. However, it was so expensive that even with all the money he had at the moment, which was around $300,000, he could only afford one arrow with about 0.6% of Z-steel. Han Sen went home at night and logged into Polar Night Forum. If he couldn't find the right second-hand goods, he would have to buy a new one at the store. In Polar Night Forum, there was a post that claimed to sell weapons with 1.2% Z steel. Han Sen noticed that the post was from an owner whose store had no license or legal permit. On the webpage of the store there were only holographic images of the products and a comlink number. Super God Gene, Chapter 48. Han Sen took a closer look and saw that there were holographic images of weapons in the making, which proved that the weapons were all handmade. After reviewing the images, Han Sen dialed the number on the webpage. Someone answered, but didn't allow video chat. Han Sen could only hear his voice. "How can I help you?" the owner asked in a low male voice. "I saw on the forum that you sell weapons. Do you have arrows with higher percentage of Z steel?" Han Sen did not expect that the content of Z steel could really reach 1.2%. He'd be happy if it reached 0.8%. "I have 2 arrows made by myself. 1.2% Z steel. 300,000 each," replied the man. "I want one. Where can I check it out?" asked Han Sen. "I'll tell you the address." The man gave him an address and hung up. Han Sen followed the address to a red light district. Although it was already the middle of the night, the streets were still crowded. Han Sen waited for a while at the agreed spot and saw someone waving at him across the street. Hansen warily walked over to him. "You want to buy an arrow?" asked a guy in sunglasses and hoodie. Han Sen could only tell he was a middle-aged man. "Yes," Han Sen nodded. The man took out a box and placed it in front of Han Sen. He opened it up and there was a black steel arrow inside. "Can I test it?" asked Han Sen. "Suit yourself," replied the man casually. Han Sen took the arrow out and tested its balance. If an arrow wasn't balanced, it didn't matter what material it was made from. Excellent. Han Sen found this arrow had better balance than saber arrows. If the bow was strong enough, this arrow would always maintain stability. The man nodded and did not say anything. Han Sen pulled out his broadsword and asked the man, "Can I test it with my own weapon?" Without his permission, Han Sen didn't dare to test it that way. But technically speaking, if the arrow contained more than 0.7% Z steel, his broadsword wouldn't even leave a mark on it. The man looked at the broadsword in Han Sen's hands and again said, "Suit yourself." With his permission, taking the arrow in one hand and the broadsword in the other, Han Sen fiercely slashed the broadsword at the arrow. Clang! Han Sen checked the arrow and was pleased to see there were no mark on the arrow, while his broadsword was chipped. Although he wasn't sure if the Z steel content reached 1.2%, he knew it was great stuff. "Great stuff. I'll take it." Hansen took out the $300,000 he had brought with him and paid the man. Of course, it was made from the bearing steel of old interstellar warships, hence the Z steel content is a standard 1.2%. Also the machine-made weapons are no match for my products. "Let me know if you need something in the future," the man said and disappeared in the back lane. Han Sen returned home and tested the arrow more thoroughly. It was truly great, similar to the name brand arrows, and only 1/10 of the price. "I was really lucky to find a true craftsman." Han Sen hadn't had high hopes because a lot of sellers of handmade weapons only produced mediocre products. For weapons like arrows that required a lot of skills to make, it was even less likely to find good ones from independent sellers. Han Sen was very satisfied with this arrow. Just the tip of the arrow showed incredible craftsmanship, as it must have been manually polished to be so sharp. Han Sen had briefly learned weapon making at school, but his work was not the high caliber of this weapon maker. "It is a good arrow, but unfortunately I can only afford one. If I don't hit the target, there won't be a second chance." Han Sen checked his bank account and found he had less than $100,000 left. "I wish I could buy something with it tomorrow." Han Sen slept for a while and teleported to God's sanctuary early in the morning. In Chinzon's steel armor gang, Bullseye was the smallest team. Few people among civilians were interested in archery, so most Bullseye members had military background and could enter military schools if their scores qualified. When they entered God's sanctuary, they would report with the military force into the shelter they were assigned. Chinzon's steel armor gang was the military force in steel armor shelter. The Alliance didn't have much power over God's sanctuary, but it still maintained some control. In each shelter, the largest gang typically had military background. Chinzon led her people to the agreed place, and Son of Heaven's gang was already there. Compared to Steel Armor Gang, Son of Heaven's gang seemed rather unorganized. Luo Tianyang gave Han Sen, who was in the crowd, a cold stare, and judging by his look, Han Sen knew their business was not finished. After the two sides joined, Son of Heaven's gang led the way, marching into the mountains. Bullseye's place was at the end of the line, and Han Sen and Su Xiaoqiao were walking behind everyone else. Sen, I think we should each bring a shield, to protect ourselves, Su Xiaoqiao said. You're rich. Just buy a suit of Z-steel armor, said Han Sen. Z-steel is so heavy and not as portable as beast soul armors. And even primitive beast soul armors are tougher than Z-steel armor, unless the Z-steel content exceeds 10%. You know we could only find weapons with at most 1% Z-steel. So beast soul armors are in general much better. Su Xiaoqiao continued to say, how nice if I could have the same beast soul armor as dollars. That's the only sacred blood beast soul armor I've seen in steel armor shelter. I wonder what beast soul it was. From its look, I think it must be a fierce and mighty beast soul, another Bullseye member jumped in. That goes without saying, it must be a from phenomenal sacred blood creature, others agreed. Han Sen chuckled silently and wondered what they would say had they known the armor was from the weakest creature, Black Beetle. Super God Gene, Chapter 49. The two gangs had marched more than half a month before they reached a mountain Han Sen had never been to. On the way, Han Sen had truly understood there was strength in numbers. No creatures could block their path with the rain of arrows from the archers and the charge of the cavalry. Of course, the scouts would inform them if there were herds of strong creatures ahead of them and they would take a detour. At the destination, Bullseye hid on a cliff and was ready to shoot the sacred blood creature drawn out by Luo Tianyang's team. The rest went under the cliff and was ready to chase the creature. In addition to Bullseye, Son of Heaven and his henchmen also stayed on the cliff. Han Sen knew they must also be good at archery because he had witnessed Son of God almost killing the bloody slayer with an arrow before he snatched its beast soul. Son of Heaven looked at Han Sen coldly as he had heard rumors about Han Sen being Qin Zan's boy toy, which annoyed him. Son of Heaven, where are the arrows you've agreed to offer? Asked Yang Manly. It was Bullseye that Son of Heaven really needed this time. As normal arrows wouldn't harm a sacred blood creature at all, and Z-steel arrows were too expensive, Son of Heaven had agreed to provide Bullseye with the arrows needed this time. Son of Heaven smiled and waved his hand. His henchmen then carried a box down from the back of a mount. They opened the box and it was filled with starlight arrows, each worth more than 1 million. It was made by Starry Group with 1% Z-steel. Manly, here are 100 starlight arrows we agreed on. Would you distribute them among your best archers? Son of Heaven smiled. Young Manly turned around and started calling out names. She had good arrows herself, so did Lu Hongtao. Hence, she planned to pick 5 other members of Bullseye out to use the starlight arrows. Soon she had 4 people picked out and with some thought, she looked at Han Sen, and you. Han Sen was slightly surprised, as he did not expect Young Manly to choose himself. But this was a good thing, and Han Sen quickly stepped up and stood together with the other 4. While Young Manly was preparing to distribute the arrows among the 5, Son of Heaven suddenly said grimly, Manly, are you sure about the archers? What is the problem? Young Manly looked to Son of Heaven. How is someone like him qualified to use the starlight arrows? Asked Son of Heaven coldly, pointing to Han Sen. I chose him, and that's why he's qualified, replied Young Manly. Son of Heaven looked at Han Sen disgustedly and said to Young Manly, I am not questioning your decision, but this person just will not do. Please replace him. Young Manly frowned, but she knew this campaign was dominated by Son of Heaven, since he had provided everything. Bullseye was just here to help. So, she couldn't refuse him. Zhao Hua, come here. Young Manly had to let Han Sen return to the team, and called out another name. Son of Heaven continued to stare at Han Sen coldly. Sen, you are really unlucky. You had the opportunity to get 20 starlight arrows and kill the sacred blood creature. Now it's all gone, said Su Xiaoqiao with regret. Han Sen shrugged. Although it was a shame he didn't get the 20 starlight arrows, he had an even stronger arrow in his quiver. He still had a chance. The archers each took position on the cliff and prepared their bows and arrows, waiting for the sacred blood creature to fly out from below. Han Sen and Su Xiaoqiao found a comfortable spot and Son of Heaven suddenly walked over and said, What are you useless scums doing here? Go away. Then, Son of Heaven's henchmen shoved Han Sen and Su Xiaoqiao aside. Su Xiaoqiao fiercely stared at them with anger. Han Sen tugged on his arm and said, It doesn't matter. Let's go over there. They are pushing too far, said Su Xiaoqiao bitterly. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Just wait until you see Son of Heaven's face when we kill the sacred blood creature, smiled Han Sen while walking to the other side with Su Xiaoqiao. It's not that easy. This cliff is wide and Son of Heaven's men are waiting on the other side. If the sacred blood creature went to their side, it would be too far from us. Even if it were only 300 feet from us, we couldn't even injure it without starlight arrows. Basically, we are just a decoy, a distraction. Su Xiaoqiao smiled wryly. You have money. Why didn't you buy a few starlight arrows? Han Sen looked at Xiaoqiao puzzled. He remembered Su Xiaoqiao to be very rich. 1 million should be nothing for him. What do I need those for? It's outrageously expensive and you may not even be able to recover it. 1 million each, and you probably need to shoot 7 or 8 before you could hit something. No guarantee of killing anything either. I'd rather spend the money purchasing mutant creature meat. Then Su Xiaoqiao lowered his voice and said, now Z steel is extremely overvalued. As the young master of Starry Group, Son of Heaven owns mines and factories of Z steel. So, he doesn't need to spend much on these arrows, as the cost of each arrow is at most 10,000. Such huge profits. Han Sen was surprised. Well, now Z steel mines have been monopolized by a few groups. Also the manufacturing technologies are not ready for producing alpha alloy with more than 5% Z steel. For some reason, the alpha alloy will become as brittle as glass if Z steel content exceeds 5%. Su Xiaoqiao explained to the Han Sen. While the two were chatting, they suddenly heard a howling like dragon under the cliff. Grabbing their bows, they looked down from the cliff. Super God Gene. Chapter 50. Such a gigantic lizard. Su Xiaoqiao saw the creature under the cliff and let out a cry. Han Sen also saw what the sacred blood creature looked like, a huge lizard covered in purple scales, flying out from the deep valley with a pair of feathered wings. The sacred blood creature was closer to where Han Sen was, but still about 250 feet away. With the order of Yang Manli, everyone started shooting down at the sacred blood creature that was trying fly up from the valley. The arrows rained on it but couldn't even hurt the feathers on its wings, let alone the scales on its body. Even the starlight arrows could only leave some sparks before they fell. As the tips of the arrows were turned, its features remained intact. Han Sen had already put his arrow with 1.2% Z steel on the bow, but did not shoot it out. This was the only arrow he had and it would be useless if he didn't have the best angle. Its feathers and scales were too tough. Our arrows are useless unless we could shoot it in the eyes. Su Xiaoqiao also shot a few arrows, which were completely wasted. As Su Xiaoqiao was talking, Son of Heaven had summoned his eagle beast soul bow and a beast soul arrow in the shape of a wolf tooth. Aiming at a wing of the sacred blood creature, Son of Heaven made his shot. Han Sen saw that the beast soul arrow Son of Heaven used this time was much inferior to the sacred blood six-winged wasp arrow he used last time, so it must either be a mutant or primitive beast soul. The beast soul arrow flew across the sky like a black lightning bolt, cut through the purple feathers and nailed on the wing of the creature, making the creature utter a roar. Yang Manli also summoned a white pigeon-like beast soul bow, along with a blue swordfish-like beast soul arrow. As she made the shot, the arrow also pierced the purple feathers and blood started to flow down the arrow. Neither Son of Heaven's arrow nor Manli's arrow was one use this time. After the arrows hit the target, they summoned them back to their hands. This means infinite arrows. Beast soul arrows are so much better than Z steel arrows in this sense. Han Sen was green with envy, wishing he could grab the beast soul arrow from Son of Heaven's hands. It must be a mutant beast soul, or else it wouldn't have penetrated the wing of a sacred blood creature so easily. Son of Heaven and Yang Manli both knew the wings were the weakest part of the creature and aimed again at its wings. The creature took another 2 shots and flew away from the cliff. Son of Heaven's beast soul bow was obviously stronger than Doomsday. When he made a shot 600 feet away from the creature, the arrow still went through its wing. Everyone was desperately shooting at the creature, while the injuries they made were still not fatal. The creature escaped and flew away. Go after it. Its wings were hurt so it can't go far. Son of Heaven gave the order and those who had beast soul mounts all summoned their mounts and chased after the creature. Han Sen and others who had no mounts could only follow by running and were soon left behind. After all, those with 2 legs could never outrun those with 4. In a while, they could no longer see the mounts and suddenly heard the thud of hooves. It was Qinzan and others who were attacking in the valley. Up! Qinzan called to Han Sen when her mount passed by him, considering her mount could take a second person and Han Sen was a good archer with Doomsday. Han Sen was delighted and quickly leapt on the mount. He thought his chance had gone, but now Qinzan would take him so he had a second chance. Qinzan followed the hoofprints and went ahead. Sitting behind her, Han Sen had to put his arms around her to keep himself on the mount. She was in beast soul armor so he couldn't really feel a thing. In addition to the hoofprints, there were also traces of blood on the ground, which must be from the sacred blood creature's wounds, proof that they were in the right direction. After 8 hours of chasing, Qinzan finally saw Son of Heaven, Yang Manli and others ahead of them. Son of Heaven stopped in front of a mountain, and looked up at the top of the mountain. Qinzan and Han Sen approached. The mountain was like a sword plugged into the ground, standing at least half a mile high. And the sacred blood creature was crouching on the mountain top, howling from time to time. This mountain is too high. Even the beast soul arrows couldn't possibly hurt the creature. Seeing Qinzan, Yang Manli said. Son of Heaven also looked to Qinzan and saw Han Sen sitting behind Qinzan with arms around her waist. Suddenly he had an urge to kill Han Sen. We must try to climb up to kill it as soon as possible, or we can chase it down. With the self-healing ability of a sacred blood creature, its wounds will heal in a few hours and we could no longer kill it by then, said Qinzan, staring at the mountain top. Then we will climb up and kill it. Son of Heaven put away his mount. This mountain is too steep. If we were attacked halfway, we would die, Yang Manli objected. We could send a few people up and we will watch here. If it attacked, we would shoot it dead, Son of Heaven said calmly. Who should go up? Qinzan looked at Son of Heaven and frowned. Obviously, whoever going up will be in great danger and no one would not want to take the risk. Only Manli and I could threaten it with arrows. And we need you, Qinzan, to stay and give orders. The rest should all go up. We've come too far to give up. Whoever goes up can have a bigger share of its meat, so it is fair, right? Son of Heaven's gaze swept across the faces of the men in front of him and turned cold when it met Han Sen. Crystal Ice web novel. Please like and subscribe for more updated novel.